It's time to be woke. Take off your shades, it helps see through the smoke. Cause the wicked hide behind the cloak. And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog. What's real, what ain't? Is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Speeding the fact.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hair of the Dog. I am Andy Kennedy. I'm happy, and my co-host is Grumpy. Good morning, Grumpy.
Good morning. It's a rough morning this morning. So yeah, it's a holiday. I got like no sleep last night. So I'm getting caffeinated. Get your tasty beverage together, because this first I want to say, if you are easily triggered, if you're still going through some things, working through some issues, maybe this is one you watch later. Maybe it's not one you watch live, but I'm going to leave that up to you. You're an adult in this. So for the rest of us who are willing to share our stories, my whole thought behind this Memorial Day thing was to kind of have a family, not necessarily a therapy session, but sharing, because and sometimes it helps to go through this together. And I likened it, when we were talking about this particular episode, an Irish wake. Because the reason why I love the Irish wake is not only Irish, and I think it's a fantastic way to celebrate life when someone passes, because there are a couple components in it that are really, really important. Number one is you get together with family, friends, community. Like this will be a traditional Irish wake will include everybody from the surrounding area. This could be people you barely see at a grocery store, at a pub, or whatever. They will all come to celebrate the life of the person who's passed. And let's be honest, funerals are for the living, not for the dead. So it's a way to bring the grieving family members back into a sense of community, that we're in this together. And that's just so critical, especially now. So the thought was, under Memorial Day, when we're traditionally honoring those who served, those who were injured, those who have been that were killed in the line of duty, we got to bring in everybody in this, because we're all part of that community. So it's not just military service, it's all of us, because this last year has been it's trauma. And a lot of us don't recognize it. Maybe you are one of those who doesn't have a family member who passed away from COVID, but you yourself were affected. And I want to kind of go through some of this so that we can understand where we are, come together, celebrate where we are, the family members and the friends that we may have lost. And then what are we doing for self-care, for ourselves, and to bring that sense of community back in here. And the overarching reason is we got to deal with it. You got to start to deal with it, even if you're not working on a set program with a counselor or something like that. You've got to be able to recognize it and start to work through some of this, unpack it, and deal with it. Because, and Rome said this best, and I love this phrase: hurt people hurt other people. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to take our grief, our pain, our anguish, and put it on someone else in a very negative way, because that just kind of continues the cycle. And it doesn't make you feel better. It actually makes you feel worse, right? So it's like trying to drink poison to hurt your enemy. It just doesn't work. So this is the whole goal. So get yourself set up, and no judgment, Irish coffee, regular coffee, mimosa, whiskey, whatever it is you want to do today, get it set up. And we're going to share stories. And I invite you to, if you're comfortable, share the story about you, your family, your loved ones, someone you may have lost, someone that you want to honor today. And then also tips for self care and how you got through it or are still working through it. That's okay if you're still working through it. So that's what we're going to do today. So good morning, Chantel. Good morning, Jeff Carr. Yeah, and Jeff, perfect. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit too. Jeff says, good morning. We honor vets by taking care of them. So thank you, Jeff, for your service. But yeah, that's something that we're going to talk about as well. How do we honor the veterans and keep our promises to them, as well as, you know, the rest of our community. So,
And I think that this conversation needs to be approached with an open mind. We do a lot of emulating of society in our own thought patterns right now, and we've talked about the dogma and the propaganda that most people have been subject to for their entire lives, and how it's okay to be selfish and greedy, you know, that I don't care about my neighbor as long as I'm okay, or my neighbor can't be trusted, so why should I care if they're good? We want you to enter into this conversation, or at least listen to it, with an open mind, and that if we're talking about making changes or even understanding and coming to terms with our own pain, that's an essential part of it.
yeah, very well said. Very well said. So the first thing that I want to make mention of, Medicare for all. And I was talking to somebody before we started this morning. Medicare for all. Today is day 76 after HR 1976 was introduced. That is the legislation for Medicare for all. 76 days this has been sitting there collecting dust. Nothing has happened. So of course, on Memorial Day, there's nothing better to help our vets, our veterans, our families than performance art. So if you're still hopeful that our progressive caucus in Congress is going to do something, maybe you pick up the phone tomorrow and you ask them why it's still sitting there. It takes 30 seconds to start scheduling things and working towards hearings. Remember, this piece of legislation has been mandated to go through 7 committees before it can ever get to a floor vote. 7. That's going to take a long time. And for it to just be sitting there for 76 days with no action is not good.
If you are your representative in Congress or in the Senate isn't doing what you think they should be doing, then it's actually kind of your obligation to call them and tell them, because that's how a democracy works, a real one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. So okay, let's go ahead and get started with a couple different things. So let's set the framework for this particular discussion and make sure that we're all kind of on the same page. So Andy, if you would please, this would be the first graphic.
The stages of grief.
Yeah. So so in another life, when I was very, very young, I was a volunteer for hospice. For those who aren't familiar with hospice, hospice is a transitional organization. If somebody is at the end stages of an illness, end stage of their life, hospice workers come in. These are clinicians, nurses, counselors, and they do this amazing facilitation of the transition. So if you're spiritual, if you're not spiritual, they have that aspect of it. Then they have social workers who help with living wills and all of this transition for the family, and counseling plus medical care to make sure that you're comfortable. So for me, it was cathartic because I was also personally going through some things. And as a volunteer, knowing in the back of my head that there was a pretty good chance that I myself would be a hospice patient by the end of the year. So it was, I got to see it from all different size, and it's tough. So shout out to hospice volunteers and the hospice workers, because it is no easy task. But they do a really good job of helping you understand the stages of grief. So this is the 5 stages. There are actually 7, but some of these get rolled in together. So I did include a link if you want to do some more reading on the stages of grief. And I think this is where we come together as celebrating the lives of our veteran family members, as well as what we went through for the last year and are still going through largely. So in this, I see in this the denial, the anger, and the bargaining. This to me is the QAnon folks. When we watch them trying to control the world around them so much that they were willing to have that cognitive dissonance and point the finger at things that didn't exist, and use their anger in a way that they felt was empowering, and they were building a sense of community. And in the end, it not only backfired on them, but some of them took it a step further, and that was that hurt people hurt other people. So that is where I saw all the QAnon folks, right? So you had this thing coming under COVID, and it was the government was doing this. It's a conspiracy. It's not real. You've got to live your life. It's okay for other people to die as long as I'm okay. And then just all of this deflection. So when I look at those particular stages, QAnon to me is a really good example. But then I think we also, on an individual level, we went through that, right? I remember when I had COVID back in March, it was still very early on, and I kept wondering, do I actually have it? When do I know if I have it? And it was a conversation with my own doctor, who's like, and I loved my doctor in Chicago because he was, there was no filter. And he just said, look, idiot, you got it. He's like, you absolutely got it. Here's what I need you to do, right? So I think in some respects, we all need somebody in our corner who says, look, idiot, here's what's going on. Take a step back, and here are the things that are going on in their lives. Here are the behaviors that you're engaging in to deflect from this, to deny it, the irritability, all of those things kind of come into play. So this is why I wanted to set the stage for what does grief look like? And in a lot of respects, we're still going through this, particularly if you're a small business owner or a restaurateur. How do you recover, right? You've got all of that bargaining and depression till you get to the point of acceptance and peace. That's really hard. It can take years to get to that place. So truly, you've got to be patient with yourself in all of this. Andy, anything to add to this one, or?
No, well, I think that, well, no. Okay, yes. Sorry about that. No, I think that my feeling is that, you know, in terms of what we've just gone through the last year plus, right? And what Americans in particular have gone through over decades of wage stagnation and wealth inequality, and, you know, ultimately through the Occupy Wall Street movement, and then the great financial crisis in 08, 09, where people that were necessarily angry and not knowing what to do about it, because maybe they lost their home, or maybe they lost their savings, their nest egg, or they lost someone and went into medical debt, or a drowning in student debt. So you have a lot of situations in society that are occurring that are knocking people down. And now you have to go through a pandemic, right? Where there's a real there's a real possibility that you might lose someone in your family because the government's response is, well, let's just let the market save everybody, right? And so these are a huge number of obstacles that people now have to try to overcome in terms of their own mental health, and getting to a place where now that we're starting to see maybe that faint light at the end of the tunnel, what the future for them is going to look like and how you move on, because you can't heal from that until you, like you said, Gary, get to that acceptance level. And if you're caught up in all these conspiracy theories for lack of something better to try to explain why you're in this moment, then you can't get there, right? So these are all very important things to understand as we move forward. Right. I always use the phrase that it's better to be happy than to be right. You know, you have those two choices. You could be right about your situation. You could be angry about your situation and just live your life in that anger because you were correct. Or you can move on and be happy. You got one life, right?
Yeah, and I think this is where learning the skills, like, okay, forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, right? So we always have that forgive and forget. You can forgive and still take the lessons with you. Doesn't necessarily mean that what happened is okay, or that your acceptance means that this behavior or what you've gone through, it was justified in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't. And this means that you learn from that experience, and you are not your job. So we're seeing this under income inequality, and so many people, massive amounts of people being laid off, and all of these in the US in particular. We introduce ourselves, hi, I'm Carrie and I am, or what do you do? Meaning, who are you? Are you a banker, a lawyer, a doctor, a teacher, whatever? That is who you are. And we put people in that kind of niche. It means getting out of all of that. And okay, I am still who I am. I'm doing something else now. So part of the bigger picture when it comes to the political landscape, and Andy, you mentioned it, you know, where we kept waiting for leadership to do something as is their responsibility under the law. And they just didn't. So it left the rest of us kind of scratching our head with how do we move forward? And a large part of this anger, bargaining, and depression, like I mentioned at the top of the show, Medicare for all, we have all of these people who claim to be on our side, yet are largely doing nothing. So that's gaslighting. And that was a term that we were introduced to under the Trump administration, but it seems to be carrying forward. And this is part of where the anger and denial and all of this is coming in now from the left, because we were so hopeful after the last election, all of these things would change, and it really hasn't. So now where do we go forward? How do I, as a small business owner, how do I, as a worker, how do I even begin to move forward when I'm not getting the support that, number one, I'm due as a citizen of a sovereign nation, and two, I would expect, because it's written into the laws at a state and federal level, that you take care of your own. So a lot of that comes in across the board, not just from the pandemic and everything else that we're going through, but where we are now and how we move forward. And I think some of this, Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, some of the what we call infighting or cancel culture comes from this as well, right? It's the same elements of Q, but in a different form. We get so distracted with somebody saying something that I don't like or whatever else that becomes a way to distract from what is really important.
Sure, absolutely. And that's part of the biggest issues. And I've always, you know, tried to remind people that, you know, the last what we'll say maybe 6 years of American politics has been a, for lack of a better term, rude awakening, right? Starting from, and I think a lot of people point back to this point, is the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016, right? An awakening, a starting to understand that, okay, well, there are voices out there that represent me. I may not have been able to articulate it properly, but it's starting from, my eyes are starting to open, and I'm starting to see that there is a better truth. There is a more just society possible. And I think as we've moved through this time period, that we're starting to get that, right? We're starting to see that. Does that mean that anything's changed? Well, there's an argument that can be made that says, well, no, nothing's changed really. Look who's in power. Look what's happened. But I would suggest that the fact that people's eyes are opening and they're starting to stretch their cerebral legs in terms of, you know, their place in society and what is possible, I think that's huge. And that's a step that had to happen. Did we think it was going to take this long for this to get to this point? Maybe not, but it was necessary. I mean, look at the people that we see now and what we've talked about with modern monetary theory and how that's changed the landscape of how people see national debt. Are we out of critical mass? Absolutely not. But people are starting to talk about it now. And the people that are against that narrative are fighting like hell, right? Because they see the writing on the wall. You know, the deficit myth written by Stephanie Kelton has done huge amounts of work at starting to get people to understand that this pay for question doesn't need to happen. And that's a huge thing. And that awakening is what eventually is going to, you know, if it happens in time, going to save us as a species. Right.
Absolutely. And I think, I know that there are many people, Bill Mitchell, that you had talked about last week, having him on your show. And we did post a link to Bill Mitchell's talk. And I do want you to kind of give us a high level on that. But those people that have been kind of beating this drum and trying to get everybody educated since the Great Lie started. So yeah, I think I am personally, it's cathartic for me to see more people, the momentum's picking up. And that was one of the ironic silver linings out of COVID. You know, another is climate change. When we stopped all driving and doing things outside of the house, and we were like, wait a second, the air is clearer. We're not using as much energy. All of these things started to happen. So if you're open to some of these lessons, this is part of the acceptance. It doesn't mean that the situation itself was a great thing. It just means that, okay, I'm going to take some things from this and move forward. So the next graphic, Andy, if you wouldn't mind, deaths of despair. So there are a couple of different resources on this one. And when I gave Medicare for All talks, this is something that I really tried to focus on a little bit, because this is a new category that had been created by the CDC to talk about the uptick in deaths, particularly in white middle-aged men, not necessarily veterans, but white middle-aged men. So death of despair comes about when you're doing everything that you were told was right. You know, going to work, being responsible, got a mortgage, and you're doing everything that you are raised to do, and you're still unable to make ends meet, and it's just not clicking, right? So we have that trend line where productivity of the American workers off the charts, income is stagnated and flat. Meanwhile, profits for companies are going up. So if you don't understand the economics of it, you keep asking yourself, why is this happening? I'm doing everything right. I'm playing by the rules, and I'm still not making ends meet, and I'm actually falling behind. And you saw this a lot with homeowners, where property taxes kept going up and up and up, and the house. Yeah, I tell the story when I was running for office. This one woman who was crying on her porch when I was out canvassing. And I sat with her and I listened to her, and she's like, look, my children were born in this house. My husband and I had decades in this house, and he passed away. This is all I have left. And I'm about to be priced out of my own home because of property taxes. And she didn't know what to do. So here was a woman who had planned to spend her golden years in her own home, surrounded by her memories. And she was coming to terms with the fact that there was nothing left for her to do. She was going to have to sell this house and move because she couldn't afford it. So all of these things play into what the CDC has categorized as death of despair. And what it is self-medication. So this is part of this bargaining and denial of your situation. So you turn to other things, activities or placebos, to help you deal with it. And this can be alcohol or it can be drugs. And then in many, many cases, it's suicide because people don't see a way out. And this is trauma. Let's be clear about it. This is somebody going through some trauma, and that's to a greater or less extent all of us at this point. And you'll know it by call it that shitty little voice in your head that is always so negative, where it over and over and over tells you that you are not good enough, you're not pretty, you're too this, too little, whatever, and all of these things that you have done are just horrific. That's that shitty voice in your head keeps going over and over and over again till it shuts out any positivity or self-worth. And so you are trying to silence that voice with all of these things, and that is trauma. And we see that a lot with PTSD, all of these other diagnosed conditions. That's an element of it. Now, I am not a psychologist. If you're going through some of these things right now, and we all do from time to time, but you don't seem to come out of it, or it's like constantly there, this is your first indication that you need to reach out for help. And I know it can be extraordinarily difficult, it feels like swimming in glue. You can't reach the top because it's just so overwhelming. This is one of those things that we really need to reach out and talk to somebody, if somebody that you trust, tell them that you're having this problem and ask them to help you find resources. There's more than just a suicide hotline, but if you're having those kind of ideation thoughts, that's your first phone call, because they will walk you through it too, especially if you're at all concerned about friends or family judging you, or you don't want them to know that this is going on. So that type of resource is available to you. And I did post some links about other things that are there for grief resources and people who are personally experiencing this type of personal anguish. So it's been going on for a long time, even before COVID. And that I think is the point that we need to recognize in part of our acceptance, is that this has been going on for about a decade, where more and more increasingly, and Andy, it's all about the economics. This is what's happening.
And that's really the sad part about it, right? I was involved in a discussion on Twitter not too long ago where we were talking about, the most evil human beings of all time. And people were, pointing to the Hitlers of the world and the fascist leaders and the people that put others to death for no reason and all of that stuff. And my point was, well, there is Milton Friedman from the Chicago School of Economics that has told everyone that, well, because of the austerity model of economics in the free world and the neoliberal regime, that's why you can't have nice things, because the country's always broke and we can't do anything, right? And the deaths of despair that you were talking about, because of that, because of people that had to, that couldn't take their full dose of insulin because they were rationing it, right? That died from from that happening, and the reason why, and people that lost their job, lost their health care, and committed suicide, or the people that got addicted to opioids in corrupt pharmaceutical industry, and all of these things that happen. These are all because of this false austerity narrative and the deaths of despair that happened, which killed scores more people than any horrible fascist leader in the world ever did.
Yeah, absolutely, because they're at the top of the pyramid for policy and everything else, and that's where the trickle down actually happens. It's not in anything positive. Let's transition just a little bit to our veterans, because this holiday is typically about our veterans, but these people are getting so overlooked, as well as the rest of us. So it's just kind of a dog pile on of misery here. And you mentioned the opioid thing. So Andy, this is the graphic about ABC 13 News, the medications that have been prescribed to veterans.
Yep.
So what was interesting is when I was doing some research for an upcoming program that we're working on, it was focused on veterans, and in particular the high level of suicides among veterans, and these are men and women. So in our death spiral of capitalism, we have to maintain the imperialism, and we have to maintain wars, or whatever we're calling them now. So we send our men and women, sons and daughters, moms and dads, to these areas, and they themselves are witness to horrors, absolute horrors. So no wonder they're coming back with PTSD symptoms, nightmares, flashbacks, and then also having trouble assimilating, because a lot of these veterans are going over there to serve their country with pride and everything that comes with it. And then they go over there, and I remember talking to a number of veterans during the first Gulf War who came back and said, I realized I was there for oil. I was there fighting for an oil company. There was very little to do with, aside from the liberation of Kuwait, so I was guarding oil fields. And then others who are coming back from Afghanistan saying, I'm guarding poppy fields. So they are being demoralized by their experiences there, and then not just having that bond of family with their fellow soldiers, watching them die, and all the misery that goes with it. So they're having a really hard time coming back to the United States, where, let's be honest, we're vapid. We're Kim Kardashian watching binge, a reality show public. That's a really hard assimilation to make. So when you're having those kind of struggles, then that shitty voice in your head is just off the charts. And this is where suicidal ideation, all of these things come into the PTSD picture. So we were prescribing them these drugs that had not really been tested for this particular purpose. But this is also part of where the opioid prescriptions were being pushed on doctors to prescribe these, and all that goes into the VA system. Now, I want to make a distinction between VA policy and VA workers. I know that VA workers, I know many of them are trying their best to do what they can do, but when we cut funding to the VA, and we've done it for the last 20 years, and we have not kept pace with the number of veterans and our promises made to them, this is the kind of care that they're getting. Throw them a prescription drug and send them on their way. And part of that is in the VA system itself, it's set up with, I believe it's 9 tiers based on your level of criticality. PTSD is on the low tier, tier 6. So they're really not getting the counseling. They're not getting the support that they need. They're not getting that partnership to help them with the transition. We're just throwing prescription drugs at them. And here we have an example of where one of these drugs in particular was not only not helping them, but making the situation worse. So it's one of those where I would have liked to have seen a deeper dive investigation into who made this decision. Because was this just negligence? Was it ignorance? Or was this a just please go ahead and die quietly? I'm not sure what happened here with this, and I don't recall seeing any final summation on an investigation anywhere. So this is part of how we treat our veterans. The part of the promise is, because we have a volunteer military force here, is if you will but serve, give us 4 years, then we will give you X, Y, and Z. And that's supposed to be education, it's supposed to be access to home ownership, and it's supposed to be healthcare. But we're not doing any of that. And so this is part of that larger gaslighting that we're exposing our veterans to. And then the other part of the veteran care question comes in with how we give them access to care. So when we're talking about healthcare, we're actually pushing veterans to Medicaid, not Medicare, through voucher systems. And we expect them to go and get care wherever they can with these vouchers. Well, that got cut. It got cut under President Trump, and it has not been picked up under President Biden, even though the military budget went out with trillions of dollars. So, Andy, this is that this is an animated piece. So if you wouldn't mind queuing that up, let me know when that's ready to go.
And it's up.
Okay, so when I'm talking about the VA community care program, this is the vouchers. And it allows a veteran who doesn't have access to a VA clinic to go out to other particular facilities. And it includes emergency care, urgent care, and all of these sorts of things. So part of the problem with this is millions of veterans are actually using this because they don't have access to a VA facility. And we're actually cutting all of these. Part of it goes through the state funding program. Part of it is from the federal program. And as Andy talked about, when you have these Friedman types who are discussing how we should spend our money in forced austerity, they're actually hurting veterans at a state level because that money is not coming from the Fed to help them, and it's not going down to the states. So this is how we manage our money also contributes to death of despair and all of this. So I want to point this out when we're talking about our veterans, because today is a day where politicians will go out and make platitude speeches and photo ops and then do nothing to help them. So make sure you're aware of all of this in our whole collective trauma here. So, all right, enough of the depressing stuff. I think we know how bad it is because we get to sit with this for a year, particularly here in the United States, where we're watching brothers and sisters around the world where their governments are actually trying to do something, while ours is telling us you don't deserve it and you should go die, sending our grandparents out to expose them to COVID and go die for the economy. That's wow. I cannot believe that actually happened, and everybody seemed to be like okay with it. And those people are still sitting in Congress. We're still putting them in front of the TVs so that they can spout that kind of nonsense. So I want to transition now to what can we do about it, and great resources that are available as a part of self-care. So Andy, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot. I know that you were going through your own personal trauma, not just with your family members who are healthcare workers, but then you're really close to your mom, and you didn't get to see your mom at all. So would you be open to sharing some of the things that you did as part of a tentative acceptance to start working through those issues and actually doing something positive to get through it?
Sure. So the main issue with my mother is that about 3 years ago, she was diagnosed with a form of cancer, which is kind of more reminiscent of like an adult kind of leukemia, right? And it's I wouldn't say common, but it's a more common in as people age to get these, but it's typically a very slow acting cancer, and usually the people that get it will pass from old age before they even start to get symptoms of this, right? In my mother's case, she wasn't as lucky, and her blood count started to change, and that was indicative of it becoming a little bit more aggressive. So part of her treatment, and she was applied for this new more this new chemo drug that is characterized by not having any side effects but being effective. So she qualified for that. But like any chemo prescription of that nature, it leaves your immune system fairly compromised, right? So my mother, from a place right from the very beginning, understood that, because my mother was a healthcare professional her entire career. And so we were very worried about what was going to happen with her, because she lives by herself. She's 80. And, how is she going to get out and, get groceries and take care of herself without being able to have any visitors? Well, it just so happens that she was very good friends with her neighbors. They understood her situation and were basically doing the running around of getting groceries and getting what she needed for her, which was a godsend to us, right? Because it was a little more of peace of mind knowing that mom was being taken care of and not being put in any danger because of the virus. The offshoot of that is that we weren't allowed to go see her. And there was one point during the pandemic that my wife and I were able to not get tested for COVID and isolate ourselves until the results came back. And then my mother arrived later that day to stay with us for a weekend without it affecting our livelihoods or putting her in any jeopardy. And that happened last spring. So it's been a year since I've seen my mother. And that's been the one visit since Christmas of 2019. The issues that come from that obviously are sadness and a longing to see your, I'm a typical person that, it's important that you maintain a closeness and a relationship with your parents. My father's passed, so my mother lives on her own. And that was a very hard thing for me to try to get around, right? But the way I coped with that is just to keep reminding myself that eventually this is going to change, right? That we're going to come out of this with either, the proper vaccinations and make this all possible. But the important thing was that everybody maintained safety in our spaces, so that when we arrive at the end of this, if there's such a thing, that we can maintain and return to a quote unquote normalcy of relationships at the end of it. And that's kind of what kept me going. There was certainly a lot of moments of sadness, but as long as I could remind myself that, yeah, sure, this is an inconvenience, at the minimum, and a very, stressing mental time for everyone, that you are going to get through this. And it's something that if you can maintain your sanity while this is happening, it will get better. And that's something that I instilled in myself to try to get through all of this.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. If it's right to make a summary of that, is that we are hardwired to act. And when you're in a traumatic situation, particularly if you're suffering with PTSD or other types of stress-induced issues, getting out of your own head and in a lot of ways volunteering for someone else. And even in COVID, where you cannot necessarily have physical contact or physical proximity, there are things that you can do. So I would forward that as one of the biggest ways to help with self-care is volunteer. Do something that is absolutely selfless. And now that we're starting to open back up and manage the pandemic a little bit better, this is really going to be very important for all of us, and it will help with that sense of community building. Not only that, but you're going to discover some things about yourself that you did not know. So whenever you get into that dark place, that is your first clue to do that plan. You're not going to feel like it, but you have to start enacting and working your plan, and part of that is volunteering. Get outside of your own head. And whatever your thing is, if you like animals, if you like people, if you like working with geriatric folks, whatever it is, pick your thing and then start doing that. And it can be something as simple as getting outside, getting into fresh air, picking up trash, whatever it is, that physical action of doing something for someone else. I cannot tell you how powerful that really is. And I think for me, as I suffer with some pretty significant PTSD, that's one of the things that I try to focus on. How can I get out of my own head and do something for someone else? So that is part of my plan. The other part is, and I know we're still joking about this, most people are walking around still in pajamas all day long, and we couldn't get haircuts, and all of the grooming has just gone on the wayside. But self-care also means that you get in the shower, do what you got to do, brush your hair, brush your teeth. Something very, very small is that first step to help you dig out of those depressive thoughts. So those are the two that I think particularly helped me. And I would invite you to share your own. Plus, I've included some resources and links today to help you maybe identify what those things are. And you'll find the pieces that work for you. And in the process, we start that community building, because as you start working your way out, you will recognize other people who are in that place. So when you hear them, spouting vitriol and all of these horrible, horrible things, you will be able to look past the words and see that they are dealing with personal trauma, and you can help them through it too. So I think that this is a very powerful way to do that. Particularly, shout out to all the charities, including Veterans Off Grid, who is right now in this moment helping veterans do exactly that. Pull themselves out of their trauma by volunteering, learning new things, and helping each other. So these are all part and parcel to how we get back to a sense of community and self-worth. It's ironic that in order to fix yourself, you have to reach out and help somebody else. It's the way it works. It always has, and it always will. If you are particularly focused on yourself, you're just never going to get to that place of acceptance, right? That's that vapid, low level pursuit that just doesn't make you a better person. Yeah, it's a dead end street.
And I think that people will really surprise themselves. I really think that that's the best way to describe it, because you may have gone through your life, a certain way, and just not thought that your brain was wired that way, that you didn't think it was necessary to help other people, that you're more concerned with yourself and your immediate family, and people should, quote unquote, bootstrap argument themselves and fix their own lives, and free handouts are bad and what have you. I think when you involve yourself in these selfless things, you can surprise yourself. You really can, because once you expose it, the feeling that you get from it, the unfettered understanding of doing something that is selfless, is just an overwhelming warmth that engulfs you. And it's the true meaning of selflessness that defines us as people. It really does. And it's addictive. I used the fact that my father passed away from cancer, or at least I got initiated into working for the Canadian Cancer Society when my father was diagnosed with cancer. And, up until the pandemic, when all of our events were basically canceled because of lockdown, I was involved with that for 15 years. I've and never gotten free shirts, but, certainly not been remunerated for that. But it is addictive. I've done a ton of volunteer things, and I get the same feeling from every single one of them. I donate blood every 56 days. It's something that will define me as a human being. When I get towards the end of my life and I look back at the bulk of things that I did, right? And I won't have any regrets. I'll feel that my life wasn't just a waste. It was there. I did things for people. I tried to help people. I maybe, if I affected even a single person's life in a positive way, then I did my job as a human being. And that's a very, very powerful feeling. And I wish more people could feel it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am so encouraged right now, particularly after the 1 year anniversary of George Floyd, and every person whose names, there's just too many right now who are being killed without due process and justice. The response that we're seeing through the economics, through the pandemic, through the injustice is, well, I'm personally saying, so you've got somebody like Rome Bethia, who is traveling the country, gathering materials and donations to hand out diapers and formula and clothes to people in need. That's a powerful example. And then on the other side of it, shout out to Subi and the new young, I don't want to get it wrong, New Young Lords, Latin, the Latin component of the Black Panther Coalition, as well as the coalition in Indianapolis. They're all doing the same thing: community building, resources, handing out needed materials, clothing, all of these sorts of things. So we're seeing people rise to this challenge. And if it's something that's overwhelming for you, reach out to one of these groups. Reach out to Rome, reach out to Black Panther Coalition or a group in your local area, and just pitch in. Just pitch in and help. Even if you yourself are not in an economic position, you do have time. And if you have physical ability to do something, it's something as simple as putting stamps on envelopes or folding a t-shirt to donate. All of those things really, really matter. So I do encourage you in the comments, or even after we wrap up, and we're getting ready to wrap up here in just a second, share what has worked for you. And then please feel free to share some information celebrating the life of the person that you may have lost, so that we can all have kind of that community building and start to get to a place where we can move forward with a positive outlook. And this way, when we get to these political challenges and the geopolitical landscape at large, we are better able to deal with it rather than carrying the heavy baggage of our own personal trauma with us. So thank you for tuning in, for listening. And I do encourage you to share with others. If not with us, today you're going to be gathering with friends and family. Keep all of this in mind and make sure it's a positive interaction, and that you are letting people know that you love them, that you enjoy their company, that you are a better person for having known them. So make sure you do that today. And damn it, Karen, no raisins in the potato salad.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Which is almost as abhorrent as pineapple on pizza.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. So I do want to thank Jeff Carr, Peter Griffin, who joins us again, and then Chantel, I'm going to mess up your last name. I'm sorry. Gignick? Yeah. I'm sorry.
That would be my cousin, and it is French Canadian and pronounced Gignac.
See, I totally butchered it with my Americanism. So hello, Chantel. So yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in this morning, and we appreciate you watching, getting up early on this holiday. Enjoy your day and the week ahead, and we'll be back on Wednesday. So thank you.
Take care, everyone. We will see you bright and early. Take care.
We bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog, we keep it ninja.